Hi, welcome to the Experimental Film Project. My name is Andrew Coulon. I'm a librarian at the Grand Rapids Public Library, and I'm here with Caleb and Will, and we're going to talk a little bit about experimental film, and then we're going to watch our finished project from the 16 millimeter experimental film project we started off earlier this year. Caleb and Will, why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves, and we'll get started.
Sure. My name is Caleb Dillon. I'm the front of house manager at Wealthy Theater, and I'm a lifelong lover of all things weird and experimental. So that's why I'm here.
I'm William Mosqueda. I am a video service specialist at GRTV and a theater tech over at Wealthy Theater. I helped create the soundtrack to the finished loops. And like Caleb, I am a doer and lover of all things weird also.
All right, well, we've all got that in common. We all like interesting, unique things, and that we've definitely got that here tonight. So a little explanation, a little background on this project. Earlier this year, each year, the Grand Rapids Public Library and Wealthy Theater get together, and we do a showing of the Ann Arbor Film Festival. And this year, we decided to expand that a little bit and do a sort of a film project. And we went ahead and we distributed clear leader film to anybody that wanted some, and people could go ahead and decorate that film and return it to the library. And then Will and Caleb went ahead and put those film strips together and created a film out of it. And Will, as you mentioned, made a soundtrack for it. So we've got the finished product here. We're going to watch it in just a few minutes. But before we do, I want to make sure we give a shout out to everybody that's helped put this project together. Absolutely, Wealthy Theater and CMC were great partners for the library. Also, all the funding came from the Grand Rapids Public Library Foundation. So if you enjoy this, let us know, give us some feedback, and certainly in the future, if you want to see more experimental film or experimental art or music programming, let us know. We can plan more of this stuff. We all like interesting, unique things, so we can have a lot of fun with it. All right.
Sure.
You got something else to add? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I've got some topics. You want to go through some fun topics?
I'm all about topics.
Question and answer. I was just thinking about experimental film, and what do you think of when you hear the term experimental film? What does it make you think of? Is there a time period, or is there are there specific images that it brings to mind or anything?
For me personally, when experimental film comes up, I think of the works of all the artists that kind of influenced me. So Shirley Clark and Stan Brakhage, and a lot of the stuff that was coming out of the 60s and 70s, really, in experimental film, and those specific images.
For sure. Andrew, what about you?
The same. I also think back to a lot of the early filmmakers, and some of the really early films that, when film was just becoming a new thing, and you had people making really creative films, and they were inventing the new medium. And there's been experimentation all along, and even up until today, where we expect to see more digital effects when we go to the theater, but a lot of that stuff started off as experimentation. Mm-hmm. And it now it's kind of become commonplace, but experimentation has been a part of filmmaking since the early 20th century.
That was my thought as well when I think about film, and I think, isn't film itself an experiment? The really early stuff, it's like nobody knew what they were doing or what it was going to be. They certainly couldn't have foreseen what it is today, but so I think just film itself, or any new art form being birthed, is such an interesting experiment. It's just that film happens to be a very successful one. And I was thinking about when film sort of reached that 1920s era, where it collided with a lot of the artistic movements that were going on, like the Dadaist movement, Surrealism, the Futurist, Cubist movements, and the way that those anti-commercial and exploratory sentiments kind of drove an industry that, was pretty much well on its way at that point. We knew what it was. People were going to see films. It was an accepted thing, and it's like now, we could sort of play around with it and really have fun and get weird with it. What were some of your first experiences with experimental film and maybe experimental film scores?
For experimental film, the seed was planted for me back in college in a film as lit class. My first experiences, or as you mentioned, with the Dada filmmakers, Marcel Duchamp, Ray Mann, Dali's Unchen Andelo was a big one, Hans Richter. And quite honestly, at the time, I hated it. Like, my mind wasn't in that mindset yet. I, do like weird things, but that was a little out there for me. So, but the seed was planted after that. And a few years later, I remember on Classic Art Showcase, there was a documentary about Stan Brakhage that I only watched because Allen Ginsberg was in it talking about him, and I was into Ginsberg at the time. So I thought it was a documentary on Ginsberg, but then they showed Stan Brakhage's work, and, that kind of did it for me. As far as experimental music goes, my triad of experimental music is an old internet radio station called Sleepbot Environmental Podcast, which is basically just an internet radio station that plays nothing but really obscure ambient music. And then what's his name from Faith No More, Mike Patton from Faith No More, released a solo album called Adult Themes for Voices, which he recorded in hotel rooms while on tour with Faith No More, which basically is just a CD of sound effects. And when I first heard that, that was my first kind of experience with hearing music that wasn't music. And it just went on from there. So it's really not a triad. It's more of a two-person thing.
Yeah, it's I was trying to pinpoint, what started this for me. It's funny what leads to other things that lead to other things. And I think that when I was in high school, one of my favorite bands was Stereolab. They were a 90s French pop group, and they referenced a lot of avant-garde and experimental composers and filmmakers in a lot of their song titles and lyrics and visual art in their music. And I think that put John Cage on my radar to the point where I found John Cage's book Silence, which is a pretty classic text from one of the great composers of the 20th century. And that led me sort of to the Fluxus art movement, which had a lot to do with experimental film, and the same, again, super exploratory, creating art without necessarily an end game or without commercial prospects. That really appealed to me. And then I also, from there, I was living in Ann Arbor in the early 2000s, and there was just a huge noise music scene at the time. And you would go to some of these noise shows and hear just these collages of whether it's found sounds or sounds that were made, on the fly, improvised, just all crashing together. And oftentimes they would project either experimental film while the music was playing, or they would show old experimental films. So I probably saw some of those early works for the first time accompanied by live music in that way too. So, and then I ended up using a lot of music collage and sort of found sound techniques in some of my own composition work. And Will, how long have you been creating music, and how long have you been sort of scoring visual images?
I started really early, I would say in 2003, once again, when I was in college. College was the turning point for me with all this, really. And it's really started off I would say, like a lot of other people in this forum, start off with just found sounds. In my case, public domain sounds, stuff you find and can manipulate to really make it something different, and in a way kind of make it your own, either because you don't know how to make music, you don't know music theory or anything like that, but you still have that, need for a creative outlet some way. So it was really just manipulating found sounds until it became something that I liked listening to. And really it just evolved from there over the years.
Yeah, I was always very attracted in art to the idea that anyone can make it, as opposed to a lot of institutions saying, well, you've got to go to art school. Well, you've got to learn how to record the right way. You've got to, master this instrument. And whether I didn't have the patience for it, or I just found that accidentally creating things was much more interesting, I think that both the film and music world kind of have that in common, where there's not necessarily an A to B to C route to make these things. In experimental film, you can make any sort of way, by yourself, at home, anywhere, with other people. There's sort of just no limits to it.
The irony of it too is, in art school, you learn a lot about individuals who even really didn't go to art school and just do what you say, just, go
Right.
for it and do their own thing and become known for it, to the point where you are talking about it.
Right. How do you guys think that music and images affect each other in the experience of film? And what do you think can be gained from using less traditional methods or less traditional musical styles when you're looking at experimental visuals?
There's the classic connection to music driving the image, or the image driving the music. For me, I find that you have to have one first and then create the other. The two sort of don't happen at the same time. So either you're presented with an image that might give you an idea for a certain musical style, or you're presented with a musical style first, and then the images come to your head and you try to recreate that. As far as what it adds, you couldn't look no far than the films of Johann, I forget, his name escapes me, but he scored Sicario, he scored Arrival, and you have to look him up, but those films that he did was all experimental, and really it's just a different experience because it's not on the same formula as Hollywood. So experimental techniques in film and music really sticks out and can stay with you when used properly, or when even not used properly. Johannes is his name. Just came to me. So look him up and look those movies up. He was a really great composer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that reminds me a little bit of Stanley Kubrick's Clockwork Orange, and I forget the composer, but it was the Switched On Bach album that became very popular.
Oh, Wendy Carlos.
Yeah, Wendy Carlos. Yep, and kind of that juxtaposition of taking like a classical piece of music and then doing it in a completely different way, and it just kind of transformed both the film and the music, and they both kind of worked together to create something that was entirely different. Mm-hmm. And I think that was probably one of the best-selling electronic music albums, I think, when it first came out.
Wow.
Switched On Bach. You can still find it out there. It's pretty interesting listen to.
Yeah.
But definitely an experimental approach to classical music.
And to add on to that really quick, Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, Jocelyn Pook, for one of the scenes in the film, created the sounds by playing Romanian Orthodox chants backwards while composing music to it. So that was kind of another experimental thing that really stood out to me, as far as when you mentioned Stanley Kubrick, that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's we just did a Cinema Lab episode on The Shining a couple months ago, and we talked a lot about Kubrick's connection to avant-garde music and experimental music. And for a quote unquote commercial filmmaker and a successful filmmaker, he sure uh, furthered a lot of people's exposure to and understanding of those experimental score techniques, I think. More modern example, I was thinking about not even musical score, but sound design in film can add so much. It almost becomes its own score. I was thinking about the Robert Eggers film The Lighthouse from 2019. And if you've seen it, you know I'm talking about the incessant foghorn that just never lets up. And there's so little music in that film, but that foghorn is just always going, and it's so oppressive. It almost, that is the soundtrack to the film. And I thought that was sort of a sneaky experimental score almost to that movie.
I found it oddly comforting, actually. I don't know why. Don't ask me why, but
that's you know, I mean, it's not always the perfect timing for somebody to get into experimental film or music, but give it another 5-10 years and maybe it'll be like wrapping a comfortable blanket around you, you know? So Will, can you tell us a little bit more about how this project that we're about to see was created, how it was edited together, digitized, for the people that know how, that sent in the film strips, they sort of know what they did with them, but what happened to them after that? And then also, how did you create the soundtrack?
Yeah. So like Andrew said, they gave out strips of Clear Leader that you could, do whatever, draw on, experiment with. So when they sent those in, the easiest way to do it is to splice them all together. Andrew, you said we had a little bit over 50, around 50 kind of
Yeah,
strips.
about 50. Yep.
So we strung those all together, made one big gigantic loop, played it through a projector, and really just, you project it on a neutral background, and then you can just record it right off the wall as it's going, as it's going. And these strips are not very long. One strip's probably like 8 seconds, 9 seconds long. So you run through all those strips once, and then when you edit in post, you loop that image over and over again. And really that's kind of the basis for these experimental loops, is that you're given the image over and over again, and to really kind of take it in and to, see the details in it. As far as the music is concerned, I really approached it the same way anybody would approach drawing on these Clear Leader strips, just mind blank, no expectations, and see what comes to you and see what is comfortable and what you can come up with, really nothing too mystic or, avant-garde or anything like that, but just going right in, taking a sound, and I just started manipulating it. I just started, and I don't think I even used that first sound I manipulated when, I started. So as I got more into it, I got more of an idea of what kind of sounds would sound good with this. Sometimes it didn't really work out the way I wanted it to, so I didn't use it. So you keep trying until you find something that feels right. Fortunately, it wasn't an arduous process. You do have a lot of options with sort of this stuff. You do kind of have a blank canvas, really, to try anything and have it work, just because, these images with this music, can really be interpreted in any sort of way.
Yeah, that's one thing I really like about it, is that it can hit a person completely differently than someone else. They can be looking at the same thing, hearing the same thing, and it's really up to your personal interpretation or what you bring to it. It's kind of like, in both the editing of the film and putting the strips in order, let's say, or putting that music collage together, it's sort of like being a DJ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
or making a great mixtape or something. It's hard to explain how to do it. It's just the more you do it, the more you go, coming out of this thing, I feel like we should go in this direction. And it's that making art as it happens that I find so exciting.
I think really another thing to look at is with this kind of medium, you're really trying to go for atmosphere, and it's open enough to where there's personal interpretation of different meanings, but really it's just what type of feel can you get from this, and what type of atmosphere can you create around it.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah, I really enjoyed watching the film and listening to the music. I find unusual juxtapositions to be really interesting in art and in just daily life anyway. It's sort of that it's sort of the pop music thing of a sad sounding song with happy lyrics, or a happy sounding song with sad lyrics that always really appealed to me. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for that in combining experimental film and experimental music.
Strangely enough, for me, when you mention that, it's like watching a horror movie that isn't like a regular horror movie. You see just scenes of everyday life or something regular going on, and you have a very oppressive soundtrack or score or sound effect behind it that just throws it all off and makes it really weird.
Yeah, it's creating that unease.
Yeah.
Which can be frightening, or it can be really interesting too. Do you guys have further recommendations for people? You both brought up a lot of different sources, but anything else that you wanted to bring up as far as if someone wants to start digging deeper into experimental film or scores, any direction you'd point them in?
As much as this has been said before a million times over, if you want to start with experimental film, really just start doing it. You don't have to have a big idea, really. I mean, I started doing stuff. I hate saying this because it kind of ages me, but this was kind of a little bit before smartphones. So I had like point and shoot cameras that I would start work like I started off with. But nowadays you have your phone and you can just start doing that. I've talked to a lot of film students who started off just doing stuff on their phone. So really go online, go on YouTube, go on Vimeo, and just search experimental film and see what comes up. There's just so much out there, so many styles, so many ideas, and don't be too worried about your ideas when you're first starting off. And actually, even try to emulate the stuff that you really like. And in that emulation, you can always find your own style.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'd add to that. You can always go to the library. We've got some experimental films in our DVD collection. We've also got a service called Canopy that has a really nice film collection, and they've got some documentaries and some experimental films. You can use that free when you have a library card. We also have a service called Hoopla that has some video, but there's really a very good music collection there, and you can find some ambient music, lots of different things. So the library has you covered if you want to get into, start to explore experimental art or experimental filmmaking or music. Get a library card. It's free. You can kind of start to explore at the library and go from there. But we like to be a starting point for anybody that's wants to try something new or learn something that with a very low threshold for investment. So
that's true. Yeah, that was going to be my pick, was Canopy for
Yeah,
sure. There's a lot of just amazing stuff on there. Old stuff, new stuff, everything in between, every kind of style. I use it every single month. It's probably my most used streaming service, actually. So
yeah,
definitely check that out. And yeah, definitely visit your library or go online and just browse. And there's so many resources. The Grand Rapids Public Library is one of the great ones. Having experienced some other great ones in Michigan, it's really top notch.
And just the things that are available at the library too is never ceases to amaze me, really.
Yeah. Yep. Well, that's pretty much all I had. Do you guys have anything else you wanted to add, or Andrew,
No.
you want to play us out?
Yeah. Let's go ahead and check out the film strips now. And again, thanks to Wealthy Theater, CMC, Grand Rapids Public Library Foundation, everybody who submitted a film strip. It's been a great collaboration. It's taken some time to get it all put together and finalized, but here it is.